Hi, I'm Jimmy, aka Perceptes, and in this video I want to talk about my favorite Eurorack filter module, Ikarie. Ikarie is a stereo filter from Bastl Instruments in collaboration with Casper Electronics. It's compact, packed with features, and has a great UI that makes it a pleasure to use. I'll start with some clips of the patches we'll explore later in the video. If you like what you hear and you want to learn more, stick around, and please consider supporting my work on Patreon at patreon.com/Perceptes. Let's start with an overview of what's on the panel of Ikarie and understand its features. It's a stereo filter, actually two filters in parallel, so it's got left and right inputs and left and right outputs. If you patch something only into the left side, it'll be copied across to the right side and combined at the output. So if you have left and right patched in at input and output, you'll have a sort of a filter on the left and a filter on the right. If you patch in just the left output and stereo out, then you'll have a copy in each. And if you patch in left and right input, but only one output on the left side, then you'll have the two inputs summed into a mono channel. It's got a big cutoff knob at the top. This is the main control for the frequency of the filter. And it's a DJ style filter. So if you turn counterclockwise, then you're doing low passing. And if you turn clockwise, you're doing high passing. And then noon is sort of the center position where the incoming signal should be unaffected. Although keep in mind that this is an analog circuit, so there may be some little variances and you may hear things when you shouldn't and not hear things when you should. The resonance is this little slider control that goes sort of diagonally, and we'll see why this is a really cool UI touch in a bit. So up to the right is maximum resonance, down to the left is minimum. If you're new to filters, resonance is sort of an emphasis around the frequency cutoff, which will kind of cause sort of a squelchy, squealy sound. We'll hear examples of that in a bit. It's then got modulation inputs, a few different ones. There's volt per octave, which was used for pitch tracking. We'll see why that's useful in a later patch. And then we've got a mod input, which will modulate the filter cutoff in accordance with any CV signal that you send to it. It's got a couple of additional outputs, beyond and follow. We'll talk about those later. Beyond is a way of doing sort of a difference between the left and the right sides to get a unique output. And the follow is a built-in envelope follower, which we'll talk about in detail. But basically it analyzes the incoming waveform and creates a CV signal, sort of a control signal that you can use to modulate other things. A couple of other conventions on the panel. You can see there's little arrows here and there. The arrow indicates normaling. So as I just explained earlier, if you don't patch anything into the right input, it's copied from the left. That's what that little arrow means. And similarly, if you don't patch anything into the mod input, it by default is routed from the envelope follower's output. We've got CV out control over pretty much everything, so that includes resonance, modulation, as we noted, and then there's a couple of other features at the top, which I haven't mentioned. One is that Ikarie has a built-in VCA, so you don't even need a separate VCA module. You can control the filter cutoff and the amplitude of the signal going through by patching in a CV signal there. And finally, a really cool feature at the top here is the stereo knob, which has two different modes that are set by this little dip switch here. I guess it's not a dip switch, but a toggle switch. It has a spread mode and a pan mode, and turning the stereo pot left to right will cause different stereo effects depending on which mode you're in, and we'll talk about that later too. Last but not least, there is an input knob, and this is sort of like an overdrive circuit. So at noon, it's sort of unity gain from the input that's coming in, passed straight to the output. As you turn it to the left, it attenuates the input, so it'll get quieter, all the way down to basically silence, all the way at the far left. And then as you turn right from center, you go kind of overdrive, and you can go up to 5 times the input volume, so it can get really pretty grimy and overloaded, which will cause all sorts of interesting effects in the filter. The input has kind of a big impact on how the other controls behave, because the changes the waveform essentially that's being processed, and as such the characteristics of everything else will also change. So we'll look at sort of some of the effects that can have. Okay, so we've got CV inputs for all of these things. The little plus symbols that are above these inputs here are telling you that there's sort of just like a constant maximum voltage that's normalized to those inputs, which means that these controls that are connected to them are kind of attenuating that kind of default high value. If you patch something in, it overrides the static signal, and the associated control becomes an attenuator for the incoming signal. All right, let's move on to some patches and listen to some sounds. In this first patch, we'll just look at some of the basic filter functions that are pretty much common to all filters and see how the interface works with Ikarie. So I've got my Castor and Pollux oscillator, which is a stereo oscillator with sort of two separate analog oscillators patched into the left and the right. They're both producing just saw waves, but it's also an analog oscillator, so there'll be a little bit of variance that'll make it clear that you are hearing two separate stereo signals. And let's turn on the sound and listen to what we've got. So that's the default sound. If we look over here on data, we can see the waveform represented. The green is the left side and the blue is the right side. And let me just listen to the sound of the filter as I turn it. So there's low pass. And high pass. Let's hear that with a little bit of resonance. So that's the basic sound of the filter. Low pass lets the low frequencies through, cuts away the highs. High pass cuts away the low frequencies, lets the highs through. And resonance increases the amplitude of the signal right around the cutoff point. So the higher the resonance is, the more squelch and squeal you'll hear at that point. Let's listen to a little bit of the stereo effects. We'll start with the spread mode. What stereo does when you're in spread mode is it detunes the left and the right side so that the frequency cutoff is actually at two different points for the left and the right channels. Let's listen to that. So I'm going to put it in kind of halfway down on low pass, and then I'll turn the stereo knob to the left and listen. You see that the left side closes even more and the right side opens up. And if I turn it the other way, it does the opposite. But it's not just panning, it's actually opening and closing the filter separately for each side. It'll be kind of inverted if I go to high pass. So turning to the left, turning to the right. If we switch to the pan mode for stereo, then it actually is just an amplitude panning. So there's no change of the frequency. Let's listen to that. So you hear it only on the right when you turn right. And only on the left when you turn left. So it's just kind of fading the volumes in and out of the left channels, respectively. And that doesn't matter whether you're doing high pass or low pass. It'll behave the same way. You'll only hear the side that you're leaning towards on the dial. As I mentioned, the input can make things quieter. It can work as an attenuator for the incoming signal, but can also overdrive the circuit by going up to 5x the amplitude. This will significantly affect the sound of the resonance as you change the cutoff. The louder that you have the signal through the overdrive, the less pronounced resonance will be, because resonance is increasing the volume at the cutoff point. And so if the volume by default is already louder, then the amount that resonance can add to that diminishes as you go up. Let's listen to a little bit of the resonance with higher input. So as you can hear, the sound by default gets kind of gnarlier as you turn this up, but the resonance doesn't increase in the same way. You still get basically the same squeal or a little less even. Now, as I mentioned, this has a built-in VCA also, so let's get a pitch sequence going. Listen to this. And let me patch in an envelope to Mordac's data. Let me turn on the visualization. That yellow line in the middle is an envelope coming from Quadrax, which is just off screen. And if I patch that envelope into the VCA, then we get amplitude that matches the yellow line. So essentially you can control the volume with an external CV input without it having to have a separate module for VCA. Of course, you can also modulate the frequency cutoff to do filter modulation by plugging into the mod input and increasing the attenuator. Let's put it in low pass mode. So the higher you turn the mod, the greater the amplitude of that yellow trace being applied to the frequency cutoff. So if I put the cutoff all the way down, it starts essentially fully closed, and this determines the amount that it opens when that yellow line goes up. Until it's barely audible. If you increase the filter cutoff, then you've got a little bit of baseline amount of signal coming through. So you always hear it, even when there's no modulation on the filter cutoff, but you get a little bit of bite on the attack as you turn it up. And of course this works in high pass mode too. And you can use a negative filter modulation by turning to the left. So this is starting with the high pass fully closed and then opening. So we're cutting away all of the low frequencies except right when that yellow modulation goes up. I'm just changing the fall time of the yellow envelope to change how it sounds. So you can do either filter or amplitude modulation with these two jacks. And of course you can modulate resonance as well. Let's just get an LFO so you can hear the effect that has. So those kind of laser sounds are when the resonance is turned up. Let's make it a little less dramatic. Let's mess with the input. And how about a little bit of reverb and delay to make this sound a little bit better? Now, I mentioned that I think that the UI on this is really cool. A thing that I really like is the fact that this resonance knob is kind of this weird angled slider. What that means is that you can actually play the cutoff and the resonance with one hand at the same time. You can turn this with one finger and use your thumb on the resonance. So let's turn it back on, you can hear. That makes a big difference in modular because you've only got two hands, so you've got lots of opportunity for automated modulation with CV, but for performance, there's only so much you can do at one time. So being able to control two different parameters very easily with one hand is actually a big bonus, and I think one of the very clever things about the interface of this module, one of the reasons that I really like it. Let's listen to the stereo spread on that patch. Let me bring it back in. Let me detune in spread mode so you can hear the difference. And if we patch in a control signal, then again, this becomes an attenuator, or attenuverter actually, so positive modulation to the right. Gives you sort of another flavor of movement in the filter. The more you turn it from center and the more you close or open the filter cutoffs, the more dramatic that effect is. Let's switch it to pan mode so you can hear the difference there. So this is essentially like an auto panner. It's just fading the sound from left to right without changing the filter cutoff between the two sides. In this patch, we're going to talk about using Ikarie as an oscillator. Some filters, when their resonance is turned very high, will actually begin to feedback and create a tone even with no input. This is called self-oscillation, and it allows you to essentially use your filter as an oscillator. So if I turn the resonance all the way up, and then we start to raise the cutoff, we'll start to hear a tone. And you can see as I change the cutoff, if we look at the screen on Mordac's data where I have it set to tuner mode, we're actually getting a tone where the cutoff knob is determining that bass pitch. So let's do something around C. And this is where the volt per octave input becomes useful. If we patch in the same sequence we were using in our first patch for the pitch of Castor and Pollux into this volt per octave, then suddenly we have Ikarie playing a melody with no other modules producing sound. Let's go back to the oscilloscope so we can see that represented here. There's the waveforms of the left and right side. We can use our CV signal, the end of the yellow line, the envelope, patched into the VCA. To give it a little bit of more of a rhythmic pattern that matches the sequence of the melody. And so there you have oscillator and VCA in a single module. Of course, we can also modulate the frequency for some very interesting effects. So let's maybe stick in some random voltage into the mod input, and then change the attenuation to give a little bit of that signal. So you can make all sorts of interesting FM wiggly sound effects with this. Maybe not super pleasing melodically, but you can use this for sound design in any way you want. Feeding it into effects processor, who knows what you might get. Let's take that out, listen to our melody again. And of course, the stereo knob in spread mode works the same way of detuning the left and the right side. So you can also get sort of weird, sort of non-melodic aharmonic sounds by detuning the two oscillators. So remember, this is changing the cutoffs of both left and right channels so that they're not the same. So that as I turn left, the left side goes lower and the right side goes higher, and vice versa. This is a very clear way of hearing what the spread mode stereo control does in changing the cutoffs of the left and the right sides. So you can get this kind of Super Mario Brothers sound. In this last patch, we're going to take a look at the beyond output and a little bit more about the envelope follower. These are two really cool utility features that is, once again, one of the things that I think really brings Ikarie beyond your standard feature set. So the beyond output is a really interesting one. What it does is a spectral difference. Remember, we have two parallel filters, left and right, that can be detuned from each other with separate cutoffs. While the left and the right outputs give you a stereo image, the beyond is a single mono signal that's derived by subtracting the frequency content of the left channel from the right channel, or maybe it's right from left, I'm not sure which. And so you get essentially like a filter that has sort of two peaks because it's the cutoff of both at the same time. So let's listen to the difference between those two. Get our sequence going. In this case, I've changed the pitch of the sequence for the left and the right sides to form a perfect fifth, so it'll be a little easier to hear some of the differences. And as usual on Mordex data, we've got the left channel in green and the right channel in blue. Let me just do a filter sweep with a little bit of resonance so you can get a baseline of what it sounds like. Now let's listen to the beyond output, which will just be a single mono channel, will be the green trace on data. Let me unplug my right channel into the mixer so we hear it on both sides. And now let's try detuning the two oscillator or the two filter channels. You get a very different sound in the sweep. Let's open up the VCA a little bit. You get that very sort of human vowel sound. It's essentially a formant with multiple peaks, multiple resonance points. So very cool that you can do this with this filter. Okay, let's talk about the envelope follower. Now, if I plug in this green cable into the follow output, let's get our sequence going. And let's bring in the volume a bit so you can hear. So again, green is the left channel audio, blue is the right channel audio, yellow is the CV output that's being generated by the follow. You can see it kind of, the slope of the yellow line matches the curve of the sound. That's what the envelope follower is doing. It's essentially deriving the curve of the amplitude of the incoming signal into an envelope. And so you can apply this follow signal to the modulation input, and that's what's been happening all this time. If we put the filter all the way closed and then apply some positive modulation, we get that sort of auto-wah sound where you get the spike on the filter right when the notes hit, because those are the strongest points in the amplitude. Of course, you can go negative as well if we do like a high pass. And everything in between, and of course you can still detune the two oscillators for all sorts of interesting effects. All sorts of interesting sound design possibilities. But there's also this switch for the follower speed. Watch the yellow line as I press the switch to the left into slow mode. What it's doing is it's changing the time that it takes for the envelope follower to react. So when it gets a loud signal from the input, it shoots up like before, but then the amplitude of the audio quickly dies away, but the follower's output takes a longer time to return to its base level. And so as a result, you get this kind of smoother, much more kind of sort of extrapolated curve that follows the amplitude, but not quite as closely. And so this can give you sort of smoother modulation. It really depends on what you're after. But it gives you the flexibility to do either of these things. And then finally, if we turn the switch all the way to the right, then we get the fast envelope follower. And this is kind of the opposite of slow, where the envelope follower reacts to the incoming audio very quickly. And so the result is that the envelope that it generates is almost the original waveform. You can see that the yellow line looks pretty similar to the blue and green line. It doesn't go up and down because it's a unipolar signal, but it kind of mimics the sort of rate of change of the audio signal. So let's hear that applied to the audio. And so that gives you this kind of bubbly sort of liquid sound because it's doing very fast frequency modulation of the cutoff. So you can use that, obviously, to apply to the modulation. You know, the following output is normaled to the mod input, as we said earlier. So obviously you can apply that to the filter, but this is just a CV signal. So you can actually use this as an envelope follower as a sort of a utility beyond what you would normally use a filter for. You can use this signal for anything else in your patch. So Ikarie is just an awesome filter. You can see it's only, I think, what, 8 HP? And all of these features, I don't know how long we've been talking, but it's been a while. Lots of features, very playable, sounds great. Endless possibilities, and this is why it is my favorite of the filters that I own. So I hope you'll give it a try. Pick one up for yourself. Thanks so much for listening to this video and watching. I hope it was entertaining and useful. If you liked it, you'd like to follow along, I'd really appreciate if you would support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Percepties. Your support will help me make a lot more of these videos. Thanks so much.